The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-host and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on our live shows.
Broadcast for shooters, hunters, and gun enthusiasts. This is the Firearms Radio Network. The bandwidth for this episode of This Week in Guns is sponsored by Patriot Patch Company. PatriotPatch.co.
Welcome to This Week in Guns. This show is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network and Patriot Patch Company.
And this show offers commentary on the latest firearms industry news, information, and buzz. I'm your host, Sean Heron. I am proud to introduce our panelists tonight. First up, we've got NRA instructor, California CCW advocate, and host of Shooter, the series on YouTube, Ed Thorell. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Glad to have you guys. Next up, we've got your partner in crime there, primetime Emmy award-winning camera operator and producer of Shooter, the series, Steve Thiel. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us, Sean.
Absolutely. Glad to have you guys. And before we get into everything, I just want to remind our listeners to check out Patriot Patch Company. You can find them at patriotpatch.co. That's the place that you can get cool cleaning mats, actually, and patches and T-shirts and all kinds of other stuff. You can go to their website, sign up for the Patch of the Month Club. I highly recommend it. And guys, we're going to get right into the stories. First up, a story of civil disobedience in New Jersey. Not a single high-capacity magazine has been turned in. So as a lot of people who pay attention to the news know, New Jersey put in some even more draconian magazine capacity laws recently. And it was the citizens' responsibility to go and turn those magazines into state police so that they wouldn't be instant felons. And we all know how many magazines people have. There's a ton of magazines in New Jersey that would be considered under this new law high capacity, but not one person has turned them in. The number is zero, absolutely zero. And I think that's an excellent bit of civil disobedience. You know, I'm not saying do it. I'm saying understand what the repercussions are and make your own choices as an adult and an American. Ed, what are your thoughts here?
Well, you know, civil disobedience is an American tradition. I mean, it goes all the way back to Henry David Thoreau when he wrote a treatise on it, you know, and his treatise that he wrote, you know, he's known for Walden Pond, but, you know, his civil disobedience treatise influenced Martin Luther King as well as Gandhi. So, I mean, Americans wrote the book on civil disobedience, and it's refreshing because the same thing happened in LA County last year. They made it a county law, turn in your magazines or else, and same thing, crickets, nothing.
Yeah, I think that's pretty great and not surprising to me really at all. Steve?
Well, I would completely agree with everything that Ed is saying. I don't have the historical background for, you know, the civil disobedience types of incidents that have occurred other than just the things that I've heard when I was going through school and through college, you know, with Martin Luther King and with the different types of things that were going on where people were fighting against the system because they didn't agree with what was being put in front of them. And to see that people are standing up for things that they believe are completely ridiculous because they're driven by some type of agenda that does not fall in line with our Constitution. It's encouraging to see that, you know, people are just standing up and not giving in to these things.
Yeah, I completely agree. Also of note here is that New York City police, where is it? New Jersey governor, they also announced that off-duty officers would also be held to the same restrictions as citizens. So nothing over 10 rounds if they're off the clock or off duty. And guess what? It doesn't seem like any officers have turned those in either. So more good news.
Well, they recognize a bad law when they hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a word to the wary, though. I mean, bottom line, like there are penalties and repercussions if you get caught with these. So if you are practicing a little bit of civil disobedience, don't be stupid and take them to the range or something where you can actually end up in jail for a very long time. I think that would be bad, and felonies are terrible on the record and also will strip you of your Second Amendment rights. So know what the repercussions are and make your own choices as an American. I support you.
Exactly.
Next story, Ohio legislature overturns Kasich veto of gun law reform. So apparently, the Ohio governor wants to run for president at some point, we've heard. Has been pretty bad for Ohio and really bad for Ohio gun owners and Second Amendment advocates. This was kind of a big thing. This is House Bill 228, and it did a lot of things. It changed some preemption. It did some stuff with the stand your ground style law for Ohioans, and it passed one area of their local government, and then the governor vetoed it. And then, as promised, the House went in and overrode his veto and passed this bill. So I think that's a great thing. I think it's good to see that, one person in a state cannot become the overbearing lawmaker, law holder, and decider of how things are going to be. I think this is how government's supposed to work. What do you guys think, Steve? I'll start with you.
Well, I think the system of checks and balances was put into effect for situations just like this. Every state should have its laws that are followed by and agreed upon by its House, its Senate, its elected officials. And if you have one supreme law that tries to usurp what is the standard operating procedure of how government's supposed to work, then you get into that situation where absolute power corrupts absolutely. And with what's going on here, we can't have things like that with politicians and elected officials just trying to use and abuse their authority. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Donald Trump Jr., if you're listening, go tell your dad that. Ed, what do you think?
Well, Ohio is actually pretty far ahead of the curve, in terms of the numbers of CCWs that they issue. They're actually ahead of the average when you look at state averages within the United States. So really, when they overrode Kasich, that really is a pretty good example of the will of the people. If you're looking at the per capita of issuance of CCWs and the amount of people that are actually within the shooting community of Ohio, basically it's the voice of Ohioans speaking out.
Yeah, I completely 100% agree. I'm glad to hear it. And again, like I said, I'm really glad that government is working as it should. That makes me happy when that happens. Guys, overseas in the United Kingdom, in England, things don't always seem to work. They outlaw a lot of guns, they outlaw knives. Well, guess what? People are still being murdered. There's still lots of violent crime. In fact, guns flow into the UK despite strict gun laws. U.S. crime at historic lows as civilian gun ownership soars. There's another story that is just directly going to tie into this, but I really don't think that this is a big surprise. When you disarm the populace, the criminals will still find ways to enforce their authority over innocent civilians and people. They're going to find a way to commit their crimes no matter what. They're criminals. They don't care what the laws are. They don't care what the restrictions are. They don't care about anything like that. All they care about is whatever is motivating them to commit crime. And you can't legislate that away from them. You can take tools, but they're going to find other tools. The UK recently put out a report saying that the firearms are flowing into the country. That it's an absolute flood of firearms coming in. And I guess that's no big surprise. And there's a lot of crime on the rise there as well. For the United States, however, we're basically in one of our, to be honest, one of our biggest lulls in crime. We are on the downturn in violent crime. This report comes from the Brennan Center for Justice, and it shows that the murder rate fell by almost 6% between 2017 and 2018 in the 30 largest U.S. cities. Violent crime overall dropped by about 2.7% in cities where data was available, while the overall crime rate declined 1.8%. This trend started in the 90s, and it has continued to plummet. We live probably as Americans in the safest time that we ever have had as a society. And I think that says a lot because gun ownership is way up. Ed, what do you think?
Oh, absolutely true. An economist by the name of John Lott wrote a book just a few years ago, More Guns, Less Crime, where he looked not only at feds, but the states and county numbers, and found that the places where you had the highest level of gun ownership, there was a direct correlation by lack of crime. All that the Brits have done is created a vacuum, and nature hates a vacuum. Is going to do something to fill it. And murder comes from a sickness in the heart. It doesn't come from the weapon.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you just said. Steve?
Well, I just still find it hard to believe that there are people out there that actually still think that with these numbers that you've said, they still think that, a gun that can be sitting there can do more damage just by itself because of its inherent nature of being used in crimes.
Mhm.
And uh, it's mind-boggling that people have been conditioned to think one way because of how the media drives a certain agenda. These numbers that you said, where are they being reported in mainstream media? They aren't, because it doesn't fit an agenda. But if anyone steps out of the media driven um, X-ray of what they're constantly feeding us, and do a little bit of research on your own, you'll realize that there is a plethora of information that is there stating the actual facts and the actual truth. And yes, we are safer as a society when we are armed, because there is that uh, there's just that inherent ability for people to recognize that if someone is armed, you know, they can't go up and do anything they want to them. There's going to be resistance.
Yeah.
It still boggles my mind, but yet that's the kind of society we live in, and that's the uphill battle that we have facing uh, trying to defend Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, it's the low information voter that is just sucking this stuff up. And unfortunately, people aren't willing to do their own homework. They'll just take whatever spoon fed by the mainstream media.
And it's a clickbait society. They'll see a sensational title.
Yes.
They'll see that, they'll digest it, and they'll say, oh, well, that must be true because that's what the title said. But it's so misleading. And if anyone does their due diligence, they'll realize, oh, wow, I've been living a lie or believing a lie. But then there's ego involved. People don't want to ever admit that they're wrong.
Get married to an idea. It's really hard to get rid of it.
Yeah, without question. So in Britain, guns are flooding into the country. They've outlawed guns. They've outlawed knives. You can't even have a butter knife in your pocket or anything like that. It's considered, it is a crime, and you will be arrested and prosecuted for having such a thing. And in a society like that, it's not surprising that crime goes up, because people are, they're much, much easier to attack and take advantage of. In the United States, we've actually got a couple stories later on that kind of illustrate exactly what having guns in society does. Clearly, there's going to be bad things that happen. Because there's crazy people, and you can't legislate away evil, like Ed said earlier. But Brazil, they have and have had really extreme gun control. It was extremely difficult to get guns. It was extremely difficult to have them for personal protection, anything like that. But now Brazil plans to ease gun restrictions to curb violence because they have such an incredibly high crime rate and violent crime rate and murder and everything else. The legislators and politicians are actually considering loosening those restrictions and allowing citizens to have firearms for self-defense and things like that. This is not a big surprise to me. This comes to us in an article from the Wall Street Journal with the headline, Brazil has an idea to fix rampant gun violence, more guns. The country with the highest number of murders in the world plans to make it easier for citizens to acquire guns, hoping to help beat back crime. I think this, for me, it's duh. That's kind of how I feel about the whole thing. Ed, what do you think?
Well, I mean, it was a big headline today. I saw a Drudge Report. They're calling the new leader of Brazil Tropical Trump. And he's really got the same kind of nationalist spirit. And he wants to ease it up so that people can defend themselves. And I got to salute him, because he's making all the right moves, because nationalism is on the rise. And nationalism is not a dirty word. There's nothing wrong with being a patriot and loving your country. And I hate to say the way the word has been manipulated to fit an agenda, but, I got to give this guy in Brazil a lot of credit, because God love him.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Steve?
Yeah, 100% with what I agree with it. Ed said, I couldn't say that, say it any better or more thoroughly. People are realizing that the patriotism, nationalism isn't a bad thing. It shows pride. It shows ownership in what you are embracing. And there's nothing wrong with that. Words, terms are being twisted and used to create false agendas. and glad to see that the tide is turning in other countries, hopefully from taking the lead from what America is trying to do and maintain.
Yeah, definitely agree. Next story are a couple self-defense stories, and in stark contrast to another. I'm going to do them a little bit out of order, but 75-year-old Milwaukee man feels bad about killing a suspected robber. So he's 75 years old. He's taking care of his 95-year-old mother. They're walking. Someone walks up to him, or as he walks past them, they say, "Hand me the money." He just ignores them and keeps walking. Here's them rack the slide on their firearm from behind him. Excuse me, gets away from the group, grabs a gun from his mother for protection, turns around, shoots a couple times, says later on wasn't trying to hit anybody, just trying to move the people. Shot one more time before they escaped the scene in the scenario. And when officers arrived at the report of shots fired, etc., they found a 32-year-old woman suffering from a gunshot wound. She died at the scene. He was threatened. He felt like either him or his mother's life were in serious jeopardy, or of either death or serious bodily harm. And he reacted with lethal force. And that's it. I mean, that is what self-defense is about. He goes on to later say, "I still feel bad. Tears come out of my eyes every time I think about it." I mean, these were criminals. They were trying to perform an armed robbery. Had every reason to believe that they would do what they said, that they would do what the threat of their firearm did. And he reacted. And, it stinks. It stinks that it happened, but I'm glad that him and his mother are totally fine. And, it kind of brings a lot of points to light. Steve, what do you think?
Well, the taking of life can never, ever be taken lightly. And whether you're defending your own life or someone else's life, that's the choice that people have to make when they understand that if they're going to carry a concealed weapon, there's always that possibility. And it's a tragedy. It's sad to hear that someone had to lose their life because they were going to attempt to commit a crime, whether their crime was robbing them, or if they were going to assault them, or whatever. The gentleman who pulled the trigger and ultimately ended the life, he saved his life, he saved his mother's life, and it's unfortunate that it had to come that way. It's never an easy situation when things like that happen.
Yeah,
it's sad. It is good, I guess, to hear that a good guy with a gun was able to once again fend off and end a bad guy with a gun, or girl, or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
But that's the state of our society, and unfortunately, stories like this happen. And once again, you don't hear a lot about the good guy with a gun stopping a bad guy with a gun scenario, because it once again doesn't fit into the agenda of the anti-Second Amendment movement
and the narrative. Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of people say, well, they were just robbing him. Is that worth a life? And clearly us as gun owners and 2A people, we know that, well, we don't know that that's what's going to happen. We don't have a crystal ball where we can see the outcome of this, where they walk away with their money and their social security or whatever it happens to be, and everything's fine. Someone pulls a gun on you, points that gun at you, you can legitimately expect that they intend to pull that trigger. You don't know what lies in their heart. You know that they're already there pointing that gun at you. Ed, what's your take?
Well, a couple of things. You can't measure someone's intentions. You can only measure their capabilities. And if someone presents a gun, they have the capability of hurting you. And robbery is defined as theft under the threat of using force, which falls under the guidelines of, the use of deadly force. It's unfortunate, and of course the guy who took a life feels bad, and that's a natural human response, because nobody sane wants to take a life. Movies and TVs play it out to be a simple matter, but this is something this guy's going to have to wake up with and look at himself in the mirror for the rest of his life, and that's a lot to carry. And even for people that train, even people that work towards CCW, nobody can really ever anticipate where it's going to go, because once you push that button, you can't unpush it. And you're making a permanent decision that can never be taken back.
Exactly.
The only other thing I would add was that, the FBI put out a report just in the last couple of months where CCW holders are usually 95% effective in stopping crimes that are foisted upon them. So it's just another example that, learning how to defend oneself is a viable skill, and that the idea of a good guy with a gun stopping a bad guy with a gun gets proven over and over again, but you just don't hear about it in the media.
Yes, 100%. Let's talk about the next story. Hollywood security guard charged with murder and killing of shoplifter last month. So some mistakes were made here. There's a guy shopping at Walgreens, gets into a little bit of an altercation. He was apparently suspected of shoplifting, but it says later in there that he wasn't actually shoplifting. Got into an altercation with the security guard at the Walgreens. This is a hired firm that provides armed and unarmed security. The guy pushes him, starts to run off. Security guard draws his firearm, shoots the guy in the back as he runs away, and he's going to be tried for murder. And I mean, I think that not knowing all the facts of the case and just that little summary that I said right there, it's probably the right choice. When you have a firearm, if they're trying to leave that situation or preclude that situation, or you're trying to leave, you can't do it. We teach that in classes all the time, that you cannot shoot someone if they're trying to leave the scene because they're trying to get away and you're no longer in jeopardy, or they no longer have the ability nor the opportunity to cause you death or serious bodily harm.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, he's going to be facing, it looks like 50 years in jail is what the penalty could be for this. And I think it's pretty awful, but we as gun owners, as people who use firearms for self-defense, we have to know better. Ed?
No, you're absolutely right. And it's the absolute other side of the coin from the last story, because theft of property is not something covered under justifiable use of force. And a person leaving the scene is no longer the aggressor. So as soon as this guy drew his gun, he ended up on the wrong side of history because he no longer had the moral legal authority. And he also obviously didn't have the training to know this. So Walgreens is going to get hammered. The security company is going to get hammered. There's absolutely no winners here.
Yeah. Walgreens at this point, it looks like they're going to be filed against for a $525 million wrongful death suit. Steve, what do you?
What state was this in again?
California. It was Hollywood.
California. Yeah. I know that there are, and I've heard through some classes and through some instructors that I've spoken with, that there is such a thing as a fleeing felon type of action where you can, if there was some type of incident that occurred and you felt your life was in danger and the felon was fleeing, that you could shoot them. But in California, absolutely not. There is no such thing. You have to have just cause. And if your life isn't at risk, Ed has said this before. I've heard other people say it before, that there's a lawyer attached to every single bullet in your gun. And for every time you pull the trigger, expect that there will be a lawsuit attached with every round that leaves your firearm. So you have to always have that in mind. And if you're willing to pull the trigger, understand that you better have a very good reason. Otherwise, you're pretty much just throwing up the white flag and surrendering your life over the rest of your life, because you're going to be, breaking rocks.
Yeah. Firearms are a tool of last resort. And if the guy's leaving, it's no longer qualifier.
Exactly.
Yeah, I do agree. We on this show, one of our other advertisers is Second Call Defense, and they provide, insurance for things like this for armed civilians that use their firearms in self-defense, whether they actually have to pull the trigger or just draw their gun and then decide not to shoot because, the situation changes, whatever it is, but they cover that stuff. And no matter in these stories, the thing that we always talk about is like one of the scariest things that I had to choose when I first became a concealed carrier was, what happens if I have to pull the trigger? It was one of the things I thought about a lot, and I found self-defense insurance, found Second Call Defense. And then they later became an advertiser, but really it's what does happen. Who do I call? I call 911 and then what? Like, am I assigned? No. Second Call Defense takes care of it. They actually assign you, they get you an attorney, they pay for the attorney, everything's paid for up front. And truly, they kind of changed how this stuff worked, because before it was you would be reimbursed when you were found, when you were acquitted or found not guilty or whatever it was. Second call defense pays everything up front, so you don't have to mortgage your house just to get that help that you need. And even the 75-year-old man, they provide counseling and all kinds of other things like that. You can find more if you're interested, firearmsradio.tv/SCD. Let's move in to the, I guess, less positive news. It's been a little bit depressing so far, but 7.8 million illegal aliens tried to buy guns in 2018. We'll let that sink in for a second. Townhall.com reports this. The FBI reported this. The number one list of reasons for people to be rejected from a 4473 was illegal unauthorized aliens. 7.836 million people tried to buy guns that were illegal aliens. That seems outrageous to me. I don't even want to talk anymore. Steve, what do you think?
Well, it's mind-numbing to think about that. Ed and I recently produced a video about the California Real ID and all the problems that were going to be attached with that, and the problems that it was going to cause, gun shop owners and those that were needing to have some type of a real, identification for those that wanted to purchase firearms legally. And to hear that those, federal limits apply type IDs are going to be available to illegal aliens as a form of ID means that they may now be able to use that as a form of ID to get a firearm. At least that's how I have perceived it. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I've looked at that information. And it's startling to know that if there's that many that have been rejected, and now there's that many that can potentially now get them because the federal limits apply is now made as an acceptable form. What are we going to do to stop illegals from getting firearms legally?
Yeah,
I have no idea.
I wonder how many of those are in California. I'd be very curious to know. Ed, do you have thoughts on this?
Well, I think we ought to just round that up to a nice figure of 8 million and figure that a bunch of them got through the cracks as well.
Oh, yeah.
And, I spend most of my weekends working in a gun store and deal with the public on a regular basis. And it's just a matter of time. It's a matter of numbers. It doesn't surprise. I got nothing.
Yeah, I know. It's definitely concerning. Second largest reason was adjudicated mental health, 5.6 million. So, I mean, the system's catching a lot of people that shouldn't have firearms. I think that's proof positive right there. But I was just shocked, almost 8 million that A, didn't apparently know it. And I kind of almost expect, honestly, some far left leaning people in California to come out and be like, look, they're in America. They're just trying to follow, they're trying to have the dream. And if they want to have guns, they should be able to have guns as illegals. We can't restrict them like that. That's just silly.
Well, I'm sure they identify as citizens. So, I mean, that's.
Yes.
Well, how about we go to another country and use the same rationale and see how far that gets us?
Yeah, I think it'll get our food spat in, is my guess.
Well, amongst other things.
At best.
Yes.
Yeah.
Their silver bracelets, or maybe escorted off into a dark room somewhere.
Yeah. Just disappear for the rest of our lives. Yeah, I agree. So if anyone out there needs that number, 7.8 million illegal aliens tried to buy guns in 2018 and were rejected by the NICS system. I've got some really sad news, guys. The High Point factory suffered fire damage. This comes to us from Bearing Arms. Apparently, a few days ago, actually, they have a one-story building where they have all their machines and they make most of their products in-house. It doesn't say how much they were wiped out or anything like that, but my guess is that they probably lost $4,000 to $5,000 in stock.
Yeah, I heard they had $100 claim. No, I'll tell you what. I've fired the High Point carbines. They're really rugged. I haven't spent any time with the pistols, but I also don't plan on them. They fit a price point for those that can't afford a better gun, but they've got a great warranty. I know some people that have taken them to competition, and because they're exceptional shooters, have wiped the field with people with them, and I always get a good chuckle out of that. But
Yeah.
I don't have any of them in my collection. Maybe they're going to be harder to get now. So
Maybe I was actually wondering, what the actual losses were here. I actually did send. I have a contact that does all their media, and haven't heard back from him yet. But what you guys may not know about me is like I am not a what you would call a High Point fan, but I think that the hatred that's out there for them is unjustified and kind of a little bit ridiculous. I have 5 High Points in the office safe. Um, just because I think they're funny, and honestly, they're social media gold. When you post a picture of a High Point, you have half the people talking about how worthless they are, and half the people about how they work every single time, and it just creates this great morass of America. And
I've got a buddy who's a former Army Ranger. He can shoot anything he wants, and he loves his High Point because he's tortured it and it just won't break.
Yeah.
So if an Army Ranger can't hurt one and still loves it, I gotta give him credit.
Yeah, I mean they're not my favorites, but they work, and I like that. Steve, any thoughts on this one?
No, I keep thinking of there's a 90s band that everybody loved to hate. They're from Canada. That maybe High Point is kind of like that band, and I choose not to say the name of the band for fear of repercussions for those that might like that band. But I can't help but think of that.
I think we all know who he's talking about.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. I would have to agree. And yeah, like what I will say is that the High Point guys, like the ones that I've met, are genuinely good people. Like they take so much grief in, and they respond very very kindly to that. And they get it, right? Like they know what they make, they know who the market is, they know, and they believe in their product. And it does make me sad actually that they have to deal with some stuff like this. So hopefully everything's okay, and that the stocks of $125 High Points are still out there, because look, I think firearms are a right that everyone should be able to have. And if all you can afford is a $125 gun, then I absolutely think that you should do that. And can you really go wrong with an American made, inexpensive, with a full lifetime transferable warranty? I don't know that you can necessarily go wrong. If you've got better options, if you can afford better options, do it. But to all the people out there that were happy about High Point catching on fire, shame on you.
America.
I have to take us to a really depressing place for this next story. 5-year-old boy shoots himself in the face in a Wendy's parking lot. This comes to us from WGNTV.com. And this is pretty awful. Mother is at Wendy's, goes through the drive-through. Kid unbuckles himself, because I think they're in the parking lot at this point. Unbuckles himself, starts crawling around in there, and finds the .45 caliber firearm that his father had placed in the back pocket of his seat when he was cleaning the car. Shoots himself in the face. Is in critical condition at this point. The restaurant was closed for the rest of the day, and oh my God, this is awful. Ed, what are your thoughts?
Irresponsible parents. They need to charge the parents, because this isn't an accident. This is negligence. This is clearly negligence. If the parents don't care enough to keep their guns locked up, they need to do some time.
Yeah, it's tough. Like they've already paid the ultimate price, but I mean, like we have to set examples in the society for other people to go by. The 75-year-old man that was going to be robbed and defended with lethal force is a good example for criminals who might want to take advantage of us. And for people who may not want to be responsible with their firearms, this, prosecution would be a good example for them. Steve?
Well, as a parent of 2 teenage boys right now, when they were very small, I took them and made sure that they understood the difference between, toy gun and a real gun. And it didn't matter whether it was a toy gun or a real gun. You never ever point a toy gun at anybody, and you always assume that it's loaded and that it could do damage. And this poor 5-year-old kid, whether they were ever exposed to the firearm or not, what Ed said is absolutely 100% true. This was negligence. Yes, it was an accident, but it was because of negligence, and the parents have to be held accountable for this. The kid doesn't know any better. They're 5 years old. It doesn't matter if the kid had been, even 5-year-olds today are playing Grand Theft Auto, and they're playing all these different video games where they, realistically shouldn't be, but they don't have the maturity level to be able to understand the full ramifications of what's going to happen when you pull the trigger. So these parents definitely need to be held responsible, and it's a tragedy. You know, their kid is going to pay a lifetime, you know, of pain and suffering should the kid survive. Hopefully he does. But the parents, you know, have to live with this too. But they're responsible, and it's just a sad story.
So awful. So guys, if you're out there and you're not being responsible with your guns, be responsible with them, because this is the repercussions of it. And yeah, they may be charged, they may not be charged, but they got to live with this. That mom is going to hear that gunshot going off behind her for the rest of her life every time she closes her eyes. And you know, if you don't want that, if you know somebody who's irresponsible in those ways, let them know as well. May not earn you friends, but at least you'll be able to sleep at night personally. Next story. Group warns that NFA branch employees are non-essential personnel during government shutdown. So what does that mean for us? Well, the people who process the Form 1s and the Form 4s, Form 1s are SBRs, manufacturer of SBRs, things like that, and Form 4s are suppressors, are not being processed right now, is what the National Firearms Act Trade and Collectors Association warns at guns.com. The only thing being processed right now is Form 5s, which are law enforcement and military transfers, and some electronic Form 3s, but no Form 4s, no Form 1s being processed, which could definitely lead to longer processing times for suppressors. And being someone who has 4 suppressors in ATF jail right now, it doesn't necessarily make me happy. But on the other hand, I don't really, you know, I don't care if it takes longer and the government is shut down for a good reason, and the things that need to happen for the government to open back up happen. I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of my convenience and wait a little bit longer because of that. I don't know. What do you guys think? Ed, I'll start with you.
Well, first of all, you know, Trump's getting a lot of bad press, and historically, it's nowhere compared to the shutdowns that Obama and Clinton did. We're looking at a partial shutdown with 800,000 workers that are furloughed or working for deferred pay. We're not looking at closing the national monuments off to the vets in the National Mall in Washington, D.C. We're not looking at wholesale closures of the national parks. This is a shutdown light compared to what we've seen in the past. And, you know, all things considered, I agree with the reasons for the shutdown regarding the wall. And I would rather put national security as a priority over, you know, issuance of, you know, various firearms permits. I think it's a matter of priorities, and I'm okay with it. I agree with you. If it takes a little longer, it's a matter of going with what's the most important thing first. So I'm with you.
Yeah. Steve?
Yeah, I agree. Our national security is of paramount importance. And, you know, if that's what we have to do, then, you know, we stand behind our president. He is our president. We may not agree with every single thing that he does, but as a supporter and as a patriot of America, you stand by your president, you know, come hell or high water. That's what you do. And, you know, you support your leadership. And, you know, hopefully things will shake out and, you know, clear up in the end. The partisan politics, unfortunately, just continue to play a factor in a lot of the things that we're trying to do as a country to move forward. And, you know, it is what it is. I hate to use that term, but unfortunately, that's what we have to deal with at this point.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm super critical of certain decisions that the executive branch of this government makes, bump stocks being one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I like bump stocks, because I think they're stupid, but that's not the point. That's not any of the point whatsoever. But yeah, for this, I mean, if the right things happen, or, you know, even if it raises the awareness and the right things don't happen, I'm okay with spending a little extra time. I will also add that the NFATCA has in the past been associated with some pushes that were anti-NFA, in my opinion, because they have extremely large collections, extremely valuable collections, and historically have opposed things that might devalue those collections, such as the Hearing Protection Act, stuff like that. So I'm not exactly sure where they're coming from on this or where this warning is meant to lead us, but I say, if that's the case, if it takes longer, so be it. Like Steve said, it is what it is. All right. I think that'll do it for that section of stories. Let's move into the I'm offended. I'm going to start off in Hawaii. Hawaii 5-0 apparently doesn't matter because they ignore federal law, say off-duty cops can't carry in their state. There's a thing that exists called LEOSA, which let me look up. It stands for Law Enforcement Officers Safety Act. And basically, if retired or active or whatever law enforcement officers pass qualification and get their LEOSA card, they are able to carry in places where normal citizens can't carry. And it was originally designed to basically protect them from criminals and allow thousands of equipped, trained, and certified officers to kind of travel freely, armed, and do their thing, whether they're on duty, off duty, whatever it happens to be. Hawaii says, nope, federal law doesn't preclude state law. We say that if they're not on duty, they're not actually officers and they can't carry in our state. Steve, what do you think?
I can't comment on this. I don't know enough about it, but it sounds absurd. It really does. I have family that are, law enforcement. I have many friends that are retired law enforcement. They are able to carry, we're in California. They have their retirement badges, they have these things. It just doesn't make sense. It's almost like Hawaii is trying to become its own autonomous type of country and make its own rules. And it just doesn't sound right. But I can't really comment on it other than just saying that I think it's absurd.
Ed?
Yeah, I actually got a friend who just retired. 27 years is in law enforcement. And we were talking about how he just went through, what he called his 312 quals last week, that, by passing his 312s, he's able to carry in 50 states and it's nationally recognized. So it's very similar to, California and the sanctuary states just thumbing its nose at federal authority. It's something that's already been, ratified and agreed by congressional act. So in the words of the dude, this aggression will not stand, man.
I love it. And I'll end it with this, that lawfully certified LEOSA permits are good in Chicago. They're good in California. I mean, Hawaii is really going above and beyond in the stupidity factor on this one, I think.
Well, maybe it's good that they are detached from us land-wise.
Right.
They're an island in themselves.
And sinking.
They're clearly detached from us as far as the Second Amendment and rights. And it just doesn't even make sense. It's like New Jersey and the cops having to only have 10-round magazines off duty. That doesn't make sense to me at all. So next story, Louis C.K. under fire again, this time for, I guess they say making fun of Parkland survivors. But honestly, I've said it on this show almost exactly what he said. Basically, he said, let's see, they testify in front of Congress, these kids, what are they doing? You're right. You should be crazy. You should be unhinged, not in a suit. You're not interesting because you went to a high school where kids got shot. Why does that mean I have to listen to you? Why does that make you interesting? You didn't get shot. You pushed some fat kid in the way, and now I've got to listen to you talking. So clearly, Louis C.K., I mean, he is a shock comic, and this is kind of what he does, but I am not in disagreement with him at all personally. David Hogg, he's a talking suit. He's Bloomberg's parrot, in my opinion. And I kind of agree. Like, he wasn't even at the school when it happened, and now he's crusading for everything in the universe. I think he's a disgusting kid. I've heard him talk, to his parents and people behind the scenes, and he's just, I think he's garbage personally. And I'm kind of with Louis C.K. on this. Steve, what do you think?
Well, I can remember all the stories coming out of when this all happened and they were doing the background checks about David Hogg. And wasn't he a high school student in California? And hadn't he already graduated high school? And then all of a sudden he's now a high school student again in Florida. I mean, I don't know where to connect the dots. It's so ridiculous, these stories. He's a puppet.
Yeah,
I think he's seeing it as a way of opportunity for him, creating some type of a future for him in politics and whatever. But he's a shill. I don't agree with anything that he says, and it turns my stomach.
Well, Steve, he just got into Harvard with an SAT score about 300 lower than the lowest people that get into Harvard. So I guess it's working for him. Ed, what do you think?
Well, on behalf of, referring to him as Bloomberg's parrot, I'm offended because I know parrots that are smarter. And all I got to say is Harvard is really slipping because, they are America's first university. It just shows you that even the Ivy League is pandering to the left. They're pandering to an agenda, and that they're no longer interested in the strongest minds. They're just going for the loudest mouths.
Yeah. It's a big problem in this country. It's not who is the smartest, it's who's the loudest. And I'll be 100% upfront. That's on both sides. We have those people on our side as well. We have the really loud, really belligerent people, and they've got them on their side. But I think most of us sit somewhere in the middle, sit somewhere just a little right or a little left, and that's where I think that the most change and the most good work is done.
It's in the middle.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they're very loud. We just talked about kind of that Harvard slipping, and people are going on the attack. Chris Pratt been labeled as problematic by TV Guide for eating farm-to-table lamb in what is described best as a hit piece. This comes to us from foxnews.com. They put out an article titled "How to Love Chris Pratt Without Hating Yourself," and in that article, they said it's impossible to ignore some problematic aspects of his life off screen. Let's see. He's an avid hunter who's often spoken about his love for hunting. He currently raises lambs on his farm. One day he actually posted, "They're the happiest lambs on the planet. They're so sweet." And then one day they wake up dead and they're in my freezer. I just went hunting. I didn't get anything because the pronghorn were wise to my hijinks. But hunting and conservation is a huge part of nature in our country, and it does a whole lot of good. Steve, what do you think about the hit piece on Chris Pratt?
Well, I can see it totally aligning with the way that he's treated whenever he's at an award show. And he's obviously a very current, hot actor who has been receiving a lot of accolades. And I've worked award shows. That's part of what I do in my industry as a camera operator. Is I get the fortunate opportunity to, work a lot of large exposure publicity type shows. And I've been there when he's given his award speeches, and he has a down to earth, personable type of persona about him. And then he gets a tremendous amount of flack for even mentioning God. Heaven forbid you mention anything about our Creator, and you are all of a sudden a persona non grata to the media. And it's almost as if you did something blasphemous. And he comes across as a person who is genuine, who's a family man, who loves people and loves God, puts God and country first. And it's typical for anyone who has good character that they're going to scrape the bottom of the barrel to try and come up with anything negative and exploit that and forget about any of the good positive stuff.
Yeah. Ed?
He's trying to live a clean life. I lived off grid for 15 years, solar and wind, did my very best. And here's a guy who's raising his own crops, raising his own animals. He's not polluting the meat with a bunch of additives. He's doing the best he can for his family by providing him a clean lifestyle. He gets attacked for his faith, and obviously he's doing something right if he's going to be taking these kind of attacks. And Chris, if you're listening, give me a call. We'll get together. We'll barbecue. I'll bring the mint jelly. And in the words of our own Ted Nugent, you can't grill it until you kill it.
And I will say to all the people out there who are just going crazy on Facebook about Chris Pratt, raising lambs, slaughtering lambs, and then eating those lambs, let's not forget that Mark Zuckerberg will only kill meat that he has either killed or helped butcher himself, because, he says, and I quote, that it is knowing where our food come is an important part of being thankful for what we eat. So as you complain on Facebook, remember that the guy who started and owns Facebook also believes kind of what Chris Pratt does as far as raising and eating healthy meat. Last I'm offended story is non-binary is not an option on the 4473. This comes to us from Guns America, and so now there's a whole lot to unpack here, but I'll try to summarize it as best I can. On the 4473, which is the form, the federal form that you have to fill out in order to do a firearms transfer from a licensed firearms dealer to a civilian, there's a question that asks you sex, and there's only two options: man or male and female. With a lot of states now giving out IDs that have non-binary exclusions on them, or non-binary sexual orientations on them, meaning not man, not woman, but some other thing. The question came at the National Shooting Sports Foundation, one of their meetings, and basically the ATF said no. Gun dealers cannot transfer firearms to people who fail to check male or female on the 4473. And, whether you agree with it, whether you don't agree with it, I don't. That's just my personal opinion. But yeah, that's the fact. Male, female, those are the only options. I think it'll change. Ed, what do you think?
There's a lot there. But frankly, I think 2 boxes are enough. I don't see it as a really complicated question. So I'm going to have to go with the ATF on this one.
Yeah. And look, I mean, like, I want people, if you want to do whatever you want to do, that's totally fine. But the plain and simple fact is when you fill out a federal form, these are the two options. Steve?
They could always change it and put a Y or an N. And it's just yes or no. I can't go any further.
Is it really ridiculous. That complicated?
No.
It doesn't seem like
I'm not missing something here.
Yeah. With the Facebook video going around lately of the man who was screaming, "It's man! Superman!" That was exactly the one that I was referring to.
Dude, that's a dude.
Like, I get it. Like, if I truly don't care how people want to live their lives, but there has to be a line drawn at some point, and federal forms, I think, might be where part of that line is for me.
I think you can take things a little too far, and
I agree.
Yeah, I think we've gone there. So yeah,
I'm with you 100%. Let's move into the full auto news segment, which is just crazy stuff that the real media won't talk about, but we will. And Steve, I'm going to start off with you. What was your story?
It was that story about the SWAT team standoff. That was quelled by a negotiator who started singing Christmas carols. I found that to be almost too good to be true, very hard to believe, but at the same time, it's like one of those Hallmark Channel type of stories. Like, this could easily be made into a Hallmark Channel type movie.
Someone's going to write it up. I think we should do it.
Yeah, I know. It's great to hear that there was a good, positive end result from a standoff, which we all have heard time and time again around the holidays. Unfortunately, some people just go through some very dark times, and whether it's loneliness or whether it's a depression or whatever, and they result to these extreme situations as cries for help. I'm no psychologist, but you see these things all the time, and to hear that there was a good, positive end result, it's a shock.
Yeah.
Like, wow, really? Did this really happen? Nah, couldn't be.
Right.
Yay. I got one word, yay. That's great. Glad to hear that no one died because of that standoff.
I think they should give that negotiator the title of Songbird of a Generation. Ed, any thoughts on this one?
Hey, I'll tell you what. I think using the term Hallmark moment might be cliche, but hey, I'll tell you what. I need the Hallmark Channel every year to get tuned up for the holidays, because I understand isolation. I understand pressure. And the Hallmark Channel is a great way. You get a Christmas miracle every 2 hours. It'll put you in the mood. So why not celebrate some good news? If a negotiator is going to be human enough to listen to this guy and talk him off the ledge, I'm calling it a win. It goes in the W column.
Yeah, I completely 100%.
Everyone went home alive. That's all good.
Yep. Agreed.
So,
Ed, Oh, go ahead.
What Hollywood actors do we know that can sing really well, that can play the part of this lead, of this negotiator?
I think Chris Pratt. We got to get him a call.
Chris Pratt might be the right
We can
person.
cast this guy.
That's right.
We get ahead of the curve on this.
Yep.
Jamie Foxx sings, but he's not a gun guy, so forget it.
Yeah. But doesn't he use guns in movies?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So many. All of them, actually.
Interesting.
It's so weird how that works. Ed, what was your story?
Well, it's a local story about two guys in Southern California. Not us. Nope. Wasn't us. This was broken when we got here. A couple guys playing with a gun, a couple 20-somethings, and the gun goes off.
You've got to be kidding me.
It could happen. I'm
weird.
just thinking, this is Darwin in effect. This is nothing more than thinning the herd. You've got two guys in a car committing a felony. They neither one have CCWs, but they've got a loading gun in the car. You've got a negligent owner who has created an opportunity for an idiot to play with a loaded gun. How could this possibly go well?
Hey, what could go wrong?
What could go wrong?
It's another movie. This one's just a short film.
Yeah, this isn't going to be doing Hallmark, though.
This would be, hey, dude, where's my gun?
Exactly. Hey, dude, where's my bullet? It's in me. Yeah. Oh, ridiculous. But yeah, I agree. I do like the quote that said, maybe next time someone gets shot in the car, instead of driving, however far they drove to try to find a hospital, just call 911. And yeah,
I should write this down.
No doubt. That will do it for our stories tonight. But before we go, I really want to hear more about what you guys do. And whoever wants to take it over there, just tell me more about Shooter the series.
Okay, well, I'm going to... Steve and I have been working together as partners for almost 2 years, and we kind of got together because he and his wife took a class. He kind of saw what we were doing and thought, hey, we've got something here. And Steve came up with the idea of putting together the series, Shooter the series, and I'll let him talk about it.
Well, yeah, Shooter the series was basically birthed on the concept of coming up with a couple of small videos that would showcase little bits and pieces of some firearms training and education that people can, take a little bite out of, watch it, and kind of whet their appetite to want to get more, and help basically promote, the firearms training side of what's out there as far as gun videos. There's so many videos out there that get millions of views of people blowing up, VW buses and taking 40-gallon drums and, putting tannerite in them and blowing them up 100 yards in the air. It's entertainment, those types of things. But where is the safety aspect for those that are taking the Second Amendment seriously? And there are people out there that do, good training videos, but me being a camera operator, and I have produced and directed a few small things. I'm like, I want to take the challenge of, let's see if we can put something together that would be effective, that would be taken seriously. And if any comedy happens, let it happen organically. But other than that, we wanted something that would be taken seriously, that people who have a genuine interest would want to come and follow the channel, take a look at the information we have, and if they like it, they'll tell other people about it, and let it spread and let it develop. And maybe ultimately it can become something big enough to where it can actually, generate some income that will increase production quality and production value, and then have some type of a following to where it can be seen globally. And we've already been receiving comments from South America, from Europe, from Asia. We really struck a positive chord with the folks over at Bursa in South America and Brazil.
Nice.
And people are asking us, we're starting to get questions like, hey, can you do a video on this? Or can you answer this question? And then we've been able to then establish relationships with local law enforcement, with county law enforcement, and hoping to foster a broader scope of firearms education and safety, so that maybe both sides of the aisle can embrace what the content is. It's not all slanted to one side or the other. We want to allow people that are anti-Second Amendment to embrace what we have to say, so that maybe not to change their mind, but maybe they can accept it for what it is versus having just such a negative impression of what guns are. And it's all about, if you are trained and you know how to use it properly, the safety is going to follow with that. And that's what we're about. We just want to create content that's good quality, that people will want to see and people will get something out of. And by them, asking for more, we will gladly give them more. And that's what we're trying to do. So we're just trying to create something that will have a lasting effect and do something that's positive for the Second Amendment community.
Yeah. And Steve and I, we come out of two different backgrounds. He comes out of the entertainment industry, and I actually started out as an academic. I'm a former history professor. I'm also a curator and historian for a small museum foundation. And then 3 or 4 days a week, I'm a firearms instructor. So in the beginning, when I'm talking about the historical stuff, when in doubt, I fall back on being a professor. But we tried to bring some of that academic approach to, the educational side to it. That's our producer. Bro.
Yeah.
Don't worry about him.
He's hungry.
Yeah.
But, we're trying to use both our different skill sets. And, very often, I take care of the gun side and he takes care of the production side. And we do a lot of, brainstorming and talking to other people in the community so that, we're receptive to ideas, and it doesn't have to be our idea to be a good one. And we're having a good time with it, if nothing else. So
that sounds so great. I can't wait to learn more about it, guys. Tell me and our listeners where we can find all the stuff that you guys do and social media and all that good stuff.
Okay. Well, you can find me on Thorell Firearms Education and Training on Facebook. We also run a Facebook page called Temecula Valley Guns and Outdoor Community. Facebook, Shooter the Series, and I'll let him tell you about the YouTube side of it.
Yeah, the YouTube channel, basically, if you just go on YouTube, look up, type in the word shooter, but you need to spell it SH007ER. The 007, it's just a play on words. As long as you put it in as spelled as such, SH007ER, you don't even have to put in the series, but if you put in the series, it'll take you immediately to our channel. We do have a merchandise website, which is basically shooter.com, SH007ER. And that's the best way you can get a hold of us.
I see it on the hat.
Wearing a hat. This is one of the items that we sell. And what we try and do is any merchandise that we sell through the Shooter website helps to go with supporting our production costs. We're neither Ed or I are taking a salary or anything. This has all been a labor of love. As I said, we hope someday this will pay dividends, but at the very least, we're helping to educate the general public and the global public with firearms safety and education. And hopefully people will get something out of it and it'll make their lives around firearms safer.
So great. Absolutely. I cannot tell you guys how much I appreciate you being here. You're fantastic guests. I can't wait to learn more about it. It's shooter, sh007er.com, and all the social media, all that stuff. They can find you. I don't know where Kenny found you. I'm really glad that he did, which brings me to my next point. This Week in Guns is produced by Kenny Ortega and is a production of the Firearms Radio Network. Guys, we will catch you next week. Happy 2019.
Thank you, Sean. Social media things. Totally getting started on that.